to be a meaning maker instead of a meaning taker.
Welcome to Ostracon, a podcast that translates fragments into the whole from which they came.
Today we're talking about Prisoner of Love, number 1, second version. This text-based painting was made by Glenn Ligon, an American artist born in 1960 and living and working in New York. His work is exhibited throughout the world, including the Tate in London, Georges Pompidou in Paris, and MoMA. He's created a whole series of text-based paintings, often using texts from historical works. But let's focus in on Prisoner of Love, number 1, second version, which was created in 1992. This is located in the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it's situated as you enter one of the entrances of the building with a high ceiling, walls of glass. And it's a tall piece that reaches up above you, tall and narrow, a long vertical canvas in white with black text upon the white. The text reads powerfully, "We are the ink that gives the white page a meaning." And it says this over and over again, the phrase beginning to repeat wherever it leaves off in the line, so that it staggers all down the page and almost gives the appearance of changing text, even though the text is repeated, because it's not in any way aligned. And it fills the canvas with more and more density as it goes from top to bottom. Eventually, the ink of the text becomes so dense and thick that it becomes almost like a cloud and obscures itself, so that the letters, which are very sharp and clear at the top of the canvas, are no longer legible at the bottom, and the content cannot be read. This is an exhilarating piece to stand in front of in person, partly because of the size and presentation, but mainly because in that simple and direct presentation, it presents the viewer with so many differences and unities. The contrast in color, the blank canvas to the text, even the title, Prisoner of Love, number 1, but in parentheses, the second version of number 1. And then the text itself expressing meaning, but almost in a sense overpowering itself so that the meaning is not expressed by the time you get to the end of the canvas. And these tensions become more and more rich when you compare them to Christ as the Word that fills the void and gives it meaning. And the idea of humankind in the image of God and being a meaning maker. Let's think in more detail about each of these topics. First, this piece presents us with something of the identity of Christ in the way that it presents a void, a blankness, and then the Word comes in and fills the void. And the Word provides content and order. It makes meaning of the void in the way that God, as the source of being, provides order and meaning to the world. And Christ, the Word, is that through which all things are made. But it's interesting that the text uses the pronoun we. We are the ink that gives the white page a meaning. But consider that we, that is humanity, has a role in creation and in realizing the content gifted to the world by its creator. We are in the image of God. Thus, we are in the image of the Word, in the image of Christ. We share Christ's humanity. And we make up the church, the perpetual body of Christ, the perpetual sacrament. And we have a role in that image, in the church, to also give content and meaning to the world. We direct the natural world towards God, which is a way of keeping the world in right order. We preserve truth. We create and appreciate beauty, which is a participation in the beauty of God. So in all these ways, we are gifted with a part in this context that gives meaning set against vacancy and emptiness. Now, next question. But are we prisoners of love? Maybe not in the negative sense of prisoner, in the sense that our freedom has been taken away from us, or that we are trapped. But nonetheless, we are the recipients of the love of God. We have been given this role, this image, this life, and we are loved whether we will it or not. We may reject it. Hopefully, we accept it and respond. But in either case, we are loved. Love is the reality of the world and its existence. It's the reason that we are here, that the world exists, and we, in the image of God, are put in it to be loved and, in free will, to love in return. Love is what God is, as Scripture tells us, and all things that are a participation in God's being, which is love, a love manifest in God's Trinitarian form. So love is, in a real sense, the fabric of being, and thus, because we are, it is inescapable. Love is inescapable. And that love is both the reason why we are participants in this meaning-making, that we are participants in the word that fills the void, and also love is what we are supposed to do with that role. It's what we're supposed to bring out of our participation in it. Now, all this is very good, very positive, but there's an aspect to this piece that we haven't touched upon yet, and perhaps it's getting at something more. Because by the time you reach the bottom of the canvas, the ink has become so crowded and so heavy that it becomes illegible. When the text becomes illegible, it is no longer conveying meaning. It is, in fact, not serving as text. It is obscuring itself. So maybe when we think of the second version, there is a second love that is at work. And could it be the love of the self, working contrary to the participation in the love of God that makes meaning and fills voids? When we are in a relationship of the self to God, then we take on this role of meaning maker. We add content to the blankness that then makes meaning and conveys truth. Note that when I say relationship to God, it's not that God is in the blankness or the void against which the text stands out. Rather, the void is the void. The text is the content made through us by relationship to God. God is the thing that is above both the void, that is the canvas, and the text, and provides the truth, order, and intelligibility that is expressed through the text. So when the text is in relationship, when the word is in relationship to the source of truth and intelligibility, then it is the clear letters that convey meaning over and against the void. But if the self is not in relationship to God, if the focus of the text is only the self, is only the ink, then the canvas is filled with ink, so crowded in fact as to be illegible.
The text no longer functions as text.
Because, crowded with the self, it has lost the relationship to the truth that gives it something to express. Selfishness is the idea that what exists begins and ends with me. If we are so full of the self that there is no place for God to enter, then the meaning is clouded.
And selfishness can be
a prison that obscures God as the ink obscures its message. Because in obscuring God, in whose image we are made, we necessarily obscure ourselves, because we obscure our source, purpose, and destiny. So now we've looked at the title Prisoner of Love in two ways. That is the inescapability and great positivity and purpose of love, but also of a different love, a misdirected love, that rather than being inescapable is, in the opposite sense, confining. So among the many tensions that this work presents us with, one of them is being as an image of God that then fills the void with meaning, versus being for the purpose of the self, which fills life with the self and obscures the self. That's why I really do love this title, Prisoner of Love, number 1, second version. It's a dichotomy, a second version of the first, or maybe two different versions of what is primary, that is to say, the primacy of love. And there are at least three ways that you can understand it. The first is the one that we just discussed, two versions of love, and having positive and negative connotations of being captured by that love, whether the love is rightly directed. But what about this interpretation? The second version of the first also implies a second chance, because God is infinitely merciful. And so the piece could invite the viewer to be a meaning maker instead of a meaning taker. And in confronting the viewer might always be the opportunity at a second version in our own lives, a second chance in our own lives. It offers a self-appraisal. Are we making or obscuring meaning? And then allows us an invitation to a second chance. In fact, forget the idea of a second chance, because we all need more than that. It invites us to another chance. But there's another way that it resonates with me that goes even deeper. Number 1, second version, makes me think of Pope St. John Paul II's description of creation in the Theology of the Body, where he unpacks the text to explain how Adam's loneliness at the beginning of Genesis occurs when Adam, not meaning male, but simply meaning human, the human form made of the clay, that when this humanity exists in a singular form, it is lonely. But then, when the fullness of humanity is in a sense presented to itself as male and female, which is when the text first uses the terms male and female as opposed to just human, then in this form, the fullness of humanity is realized in the two that love. And this makes completion, and this solves the problem of loneliness. Because now, in that love, the human form is in the image of the Trinity, where God is love because that love is realized in the relationship of God within himself, and now realized in the love that is in the relationship of the human form within itself. This completes us. It is part of what makes us in the image of God. And this is relevant to the expression of the painting because this can be the love that gives meaning if it is selfless. We are given this great gift of one another. We are entrusted with one another. We are entrusted with one another's beauties and talents. We are entrusted with one another's needs and vulnerabilities. Even as God trusts us with himself when he put himself at our mercy and was crucified, we are entrusted, given to one another in this form of fulfillment where love completes the image in which we are made. And when we love one another in that way, then we are the meaning makers, filling the void with the truth of what God is and what our destiny and source are. So number one, second version, also makes me think of our unique creation and call to love and care for each other. And this as an immediate and both practical and transcendent way that we participate in the Word filling the void. It also reminds me again of Pope St. John Paul II's statement that the opposite of love isn't hate, the opposite of love is use. And so the use of the other for the self could be the self-love that obscures meaning, but the true love of the other would be the realization of the good, the true, the beautiful, and the participation in the being of God that fills the void through us and with us, his body and his image. There are layers of versions and versions. As we wrap up, I want to take just a moment to think about the artist's intent with this piece. And this is usually something that we do not explore because this podcast takes the position that the meaning of a work of art is independent of the intent of the artist. In this case, however, I think it's fair to bring it into the discussion because the text comes from a real historical place and perspective. We've been focused on it in its abstract sense of meaning making, but it's drawn from a particular perspective that marginalized communities give meaning to and validate dominant cultures. And in some sense, the piece is set up in such a way that it could apply to any case where one identity draws meaning from or derives identity from its relationship to another identity. By and large, those social commentary topics are beyond the scope of this podcast. But there is something we can say here that relates to the interpretation of the piece. First of all, in the most fundamental sense, we take our identities from our relationship to God. That is the source of our identity, and thus the primary lens through which we interpret this concept of bringing meaning into void and being a meaning maker. But second, how we relate to others reflects how we relate to God. As Christ says, "What you do to the least among you, you do to me." And as Christ says, there are two primary commandments, which again rings the bell of number 1, 2 versions. First, you're called to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your strength. And second, you are called to love your neighbor as yourself. Thus, we are called to love the marginalized. And when we do, then our identity is revealed. Our identity derived from God is revealed, both in the lover and in the loved. But if we use one another, instead of loving one another, then our human identity is obscured. And that brings us right back to where we began. If we take up the version of love that is the love of the self, that is the confinement, and this would include love of self through subjugation of another, then we obscure our own identity, our own role, to play in the way that God, with God's identity of love, fills the void and makes meaning. Essentially, we obscure our own purpose of conveying truth. But in right relationship, in the love of God and one another, then we have this almost inconceivably amazing role of being God's own image, the word that creates, spoken into nothingness and filling it with being, the being that is inescapable love.